Dän Discovery Centre. I want to start this evening off by acknowledging that we live and work on unceded Sinixt Tmulau. If you don't recognize Tmulau, that's totally okay. That's the Sinixt word for homeland in their dialects in Sealshin. So the other thing I would like you guys to be able to take away, to kind of share with the Sinixt side of things, is the actual name for Red Mountain. Long before it was ever known as Red Mountain, it was known as Camarkin. So if you guys can take that name home with you, share it around with other people, you'll be a part of Sinight's resurgence here in their territory, and we'll sure be pleased with you as well. A bit of housekeeping as well. I got a report that there might be somebody parked on the weigh scale currently. We want highways to like us a little bit. You probably don't want to be in trouble with them either, so if you are parked out there, we'll ask you to move your vehicle and pop back in for this pretty awesome presentation we have coming up here. We also have another speaker series coming in. March 28th, we'll be having Luke Corrado as well as Kim Dean coming here to share some stories with us. So you guys won't want to miss that one either. And we also have a silent auction that's going to be starting up on Friday, next Friday. You can already see some of the items that we have up on the website, so if you check out either our website or any of the links that you might find in one of the posters kicking around, you won't want to miss out on that silent auction either. And now to the main event, whole reason you guys are all here tonight. Aside from being a true man of adventure, we have Bill Hanlon here, who's got over 20 years as an educator. He's a woodworker, he is a wilderness hunter, as well as a backcountry horseman, and has over 30 years experience in conservation. And it's not his love of motorcycles, I'm told, that brandished that lovely new badge on his nose, but maybe his love for skiing and that lovely crash that happened yesterday. I think that's but you know what? He's got a pretty amazing story to share with us here tonight, so I'm not going to take up any more of you guys' time. Please join me in welcoming Bill Hanlon to the floor. Bill, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. I'll try to use my teacher's voice. I didn't know hunting stories were so popular in Rossland. This is great turnout. Thanks very much. Thanks to Skylar for the introduction. We're going to talk about a different traditional territory tonight, the territory where this discovery took place. This is the first of the presentations for the 25th anniversary west of the Rockies. I did one in Alberta in January, but it's been 25 years since the original discovery. So there's been a bit of a resurgence, a few more requests for this presentation. And so again, you're going to see 4 sequels of this discovery that has played out over the last 25 years. I'm going to try to not forget anything because a book came out from the Royal BC Museum on the discovery, and it covers everything from the culture to the landscape, to the glaciology, the artifacts, pretty much everything, and there's like 37 different chapters in it. So it's quite an extensive project that's occurred over the last, well, it came out in 2017. It's available through the Royal BC Museum or Amazon, etc. But anyways, I'm going to try not to forget anything in this book, and I'll start you with my journey. I'm going to try to lean a little bit more on the conclusions in this book as opposed to our hunting story. Again, I try to, when I have such diverse crowds, and a lot of times I speak to conservation groups, so I can talk specifically about the hunting and what we're doing on the landscape, etc. Talk a little bit about our, maybe firearms and the gear that we're carrying. But tonight I'll try to focus more on the discovery and on the findings of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi. So that's the name. In southern Shoshone is Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi, and translated into English is long ago person found. Exceptional discoveries often happen in exceptional places under exceptional circumstances. And as I walk through the 4 sequels tonight, you'll realize that it's not just happenstance or a series of events that happened, or serendipity for that matter, but it was actually meant to happen. And we were not just chosen to find them, we were meant to find Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi. And hopefully that's going to be the message that you get away from tonight here. The story starts in 1999 in the very southeast corner of British Columbia. I live in Sparwood in the Elk Valley. My 2 hunting partners, Mike Roach and Warren Ward, live in Nelson. We were all teaching at the time. We drove into Alberta, up into British Columbia on the Alaska Highway, up into Yukon, into the Whitehorse, and down into the Tashiashini-Alsac Provincial Park. We're in the traditional territory of the Champagne and Aishihik First Nations. They're the first self-governed First Nations in Canada. Here's the British Columbia-Yukon border, the Alaska-BC-Yukon border here. We were hunting in the Tashinshini-Alsac Provincial Park, which is a Class A provincial park in British Columbia, but it's also part of a World Heritage Site, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it's comprised of the Kwäday National Park in Alaska, the Wrangell and St. Elias National Parks in Alaska, and the Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. It comprises the largest protected area in the world. It's 21 million acres, about 10 million hectares. And again, a complete, fully functioning ecosystem. And as far as I'm aware, only hunting is allowed in British Columbia in the Class A provincial park. And we were under what's called a limited entry authorization. We had won the lottery to hunt Dall sheep there. So here's after a 3,000 kilometer drive, my hunting partners Mike Roach and Warren Ward in our early model pickup truck and our external frame packs, and the Tashinshini is over Mike's shoulder there, and we're kind of anticipating this 10-day trip. We have provisions for 10 days. It took us 6 years to draw this tag, and it's even harder now. I mean, limited entry becomes quite popular. Sheep hunting has become kind of a very popular trend these days. So it's very hard to get a tag in the Tashinshini. When we drew this tag, it was about 5-to-1 odds, and I think this year is about 35-to-1 odds. So it's getting more and more difficult. I think there's the same amount of sheep, but there's just that much more people interested in it. So here we are on the banks of the river, and I always try to break the ice by giving my 2 hunting partners a hard time. Warren missed the memo. He thought we were going duck hunting. And he brought hip waders, whereas the chest waders were going to be required to get across the Tashinshini. But because we call Mike Pack Mike, he carries us across the river and our gear and everything else. And he still does today, because we're still hunting together today. So we've got a long trek ahead of us. It's 365-degree sheep habitat. It's a spectacular wild piece of real estate. There's no roads, there's no mines or any development or any settlements or anything. We're on an old seismic exploration road or mining exploration road that was put in the late 80s for mine exploration. You remember the Windy Craigie mine project and the Rainy Hollow and all those kind of mine projects that were canceled when it became a world-class heritage, or the Tashinshini-Alsac Provincial Park. As part of it was the protected area strategy for the 90s, where they were protecting 14% or 15% of the province. We're under a new program now, or at least a new initiative now, that 30 by 30 initiative, and trying to protect 30% of the province by 2030. So here we are, we're definitely a little bit younger. Like I said, it's 25 years ago, and definitely a little bit younger. It's a very spectacular piece of real estate, and 365 degrees of sheep habitat. This is the Parton River. We have to cross 2 rivers immediately, the Tashinshini right away, and then the Parton River. Then we ditched all our hip waders and chest waders and stuff, and off we went. We still had to cross some streams throughout our hunting trip, but we didn't need the same. We didn't want to get. It didn't matter if we got wet. We didn't want to get wet when we got started. That's all. One of our techniques is we just get high up on a ridge and we glass, kind of let our binoculars do the walking and our spotting scopes. Try not to stink up the country or let any wildlife know that we're there. Just try to sneak our way through. Starting to get into some pretty good sheep habitat. It's 360 degree sheep habitat. This is about our second night in, and again we're not. We've been on a few northern sheep hunts, backpacking sheep hunts by this time, so it wasn't our first trip, but again it was definitely early on in our northern sheep hunting career. And our first chance to hunt Dall sheep. So Mike managed to get very lucky in the second day, the evening of the second night, and we set up camp, and then we went hunting in different directions. And the regulation in British Columbia is full curl or 8 years or older for a thin horn sheep regulation. So Mike aged this one, and it actually turned out to be an 11-year-old ram. So which is good because it either has to be to the bridge of the nose, or annuli has to count up to 8 to identify it as an 8-year-old ram. So what do we do with, the day after we shoot a ram is usually a camp day. We butcher the ram completely. We take the cape off the skull. We salt the cape so it preserves the cape. We climbed up into one of the ice patches up above us here, a snow patch. We kind of built a refrigerator and we buried the meat in the snow because we were going to be gone for another 8 days after this, and we didn't want to pack it around with us, and it just would have spoiled. So we buried it in the snow. We marked it so we could find it on our way back out, and we went sheep hunting again. So this is some of the remnants of the mine, the mine exploration buildings that were in there before it became a park. There's the Tashishini-Alsac Provincial Park is co-managed between the Champagne and Aishihik First Nation, the Haines Junction Yukon, or it's called Champagne, and the BC Parks. And they've cleaned this up. They've had some summer programs and they've gone in there and cleaned it all up. There was some barrels full of diesel and hydraulic oil and that kind of thing as well. It's all cleaned up now. So we're about 40 kilometers in here as the wolf walks, and this is about as far as we were going to go with our full packs. From here we were going to day hunt after that. We're kind of in the best of the best habitat, and so from here we were going to be able to take our heavy packs off. I've been sheep hunting for 35 years, and we had 50-pound packs then, and even with the technology we have today, our pack is still 50 pounds. I can't seem to get it under 50 pounds for a 10-day pack. So like I said, so here we get set up, and again, the weather, this country creates weather. It's where the weather's created, so it's, you depend on your rain gear. Here's the valley that we came in on, the highway's in the back distance there. Again, we try to get up high and then glass these basins and try to get a look around and sit and let our binoculars do the walking instead of our wearing a boot leather. Started looking at some real rugged rock and ice. Starting to get into some of the glacial country that you're going to see a lot of in a few minutes. We'd spotted some rams on this ridge here. We had a group hunt, so we all drew tags. Mike had shot his ram. We'd seen some rams here, but we had a lot of country to hunt before we got over there, so we kind of thought, well, we'll leave those in our back pocket and we can hunt those a little later on in the trip. Started looking into what's called the Samuel Glacier, and this kind of ice patch here, these 3 Nunaatuks, is going to be kind of keep an eye on that location. Started looking at these ice patches, and an ice patch has kind of melted away from the parent glacier, and so it's kind of like it's a little patch on its own, and these are disappearing very fast. We've got a single ram spotted way up in these chimney chutes up here. It's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Wolfing down a power bar or a cliff bar, and Mike and Warren saying, "What are you doing? Get going, get up after that. It's going to be all night by the time you get up there, and if you're fortunate." And I was, and this was about 10 o'clock at night. I mean, it's daylight. It's only dark for about 4 hours that far north. So by the time we got it all taken apart and back up to camp, I think it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. There's something foreboding about this picture because over my left shoulder is going to be the discovery site, yet unknown to us. The next day, again, camp day, we take the ram apart, butcher it all so we're not packing bones or sinew or tissue or anything that we're not going to eat. Break it all down, salt the cape, cape the skull out, salt the cape, make sure it's all looked after so no predators can get at it or bugs or anything. We didn't have to worry about bugs on this trip because it was pretty rainy. So now we had 2 rams, so we were looking to try to get into that basin where we'd seen those rams a few days prior. And because we're hunters, we tend to pay attention to not only the weather, but the time of day that the thermals are and habits of the wildlife and et cetera and sign. And we knew that if we went around this basin and up from the bottom, by the time we got into that basin, the wind would be blowing up the valley. The thermals would have changed in the heat of the day and they would have been rising. So we decided, well, if we want to be in the best position to be able to get a look at these rams, we better go up and around and come down on top from those rams so by the time we get there, the wind will be in our favor. So that's what took us up through this ice patch and around the corner up into this piece of ice right here. And this country is, even in 1999, if you remember, it was the hottest year on record in British Columbia. And it was the base of these ice patches is all, it's half mud, half ice, half frozen, half thawed, so it's difficult walking. A lot of times we try to stay on the ice. Probably the most spectacular landscape I've ever been in. And this is called, the First Nations call this Empty Valley because it's empty. There's not even lichen on the rocks yet. The ice has just receded that recently, and it's receding even more now. I mean, 25 years later, of course. So we decided to have some lunch, and we haven't got into the basin yet where you'd seen those sheep a few days prior. We don't know if they're there or not, but we have a discussion, say, let's just skate across this big ice patch in front of us, and we'll kind of get into the basin a lot quicker. And Mike and Warren said, oh, no, I can't do that, we can't do that. We promised our wives we wouldn't climb on any glaciers. I said, okay, well, we can skirt around the edge, and because it was all muddy and melting, and so it was difficult walking. And so we decided to go around the edge of this big wall of ice. And instead of being up on the ice patch, we'd walk along this wall of ice. And shortly after this picture was taken, I picked up a stick. And I go, hey, Mike, look, a stick. We're not the first people to be here, to hunt here. And we go, because in a landscape like this, there's no wood, there's no brush, there's no trees, there's no willows, there's nothing. And so this kind of stood out. So I put it back down in the rocks, and we walked a little further, and Mike picked up another stick. He says, hey, Bill, what'd you do to that stick? I said, well, I just put it back on the rocks there. He says, it looks like it fits together. They look like they're broken, and they would have fit together. So I turned around and went back to get it, and when I got back to Mike, he had picked up a third stick, and it was a long, curved stick. And being school teachers, not archaeologists, he goes, it begins with an A, and he's making a kind of a throwing motion. Begins with an A. And we're trying to remember the word atlatl. And in the meantime, so Mike and I are sitting there chattering. In the meantime, Warren's walking along this wall of ice, and he looks up with his binoculars and he goes, hey guys, I think I found the poor fella who lost all this stuff. So because I had a note from my wife that I could climb up on the glacier, they sent me up, the sacrifice, and this is what Warren had seen. It's like a big smudge, and if you've seen anything like a winter-killed deer in the snow, killed by a predator or something like that, it just dissipates into the environment with hair and fur and bones and everything. There's like a big smudge on the snow surface. So that's what we first noticed. Here's one of the walking sticks that we carried, the most recent snowfall, and this turned out to be a gopher skin robe. This was its clothing. We thought it was a pack at first. We could see some little tiny stitches on it. One thing that I found first, I picked up right off the surface of this, and I'd already picked it up before we took this picture, was like a knife-like object that was in a sheath. It was in a beaver hide sheath, and I slid it out, and it was nothing I'd ever seen before, so I knew it wasn't contemporary by any stretch of the imagination. And so I put it back together, and I just kind of put it back down, but it wasn't in the picture. I mean, these are all bones, and they're very spongy. So you can see there's some fringe, and it wasn't like it was a Daniel Boone coat or anything, but fringes were designed to actually draw the moisture off of a garment. So there was that kind of feature on there. There's a bunch of little tiny stitches. This turned out to be 95 Arctic ground squirrels, and all sewn together, and it was his clothing. So as we're looking around, and we're trying not to disturb anything, because I think we realized, I mean, the hair on the back of our neck stood up. It was kind of like it was a very electric moment there. And we didn't want to disturb anything. I think we recognized our responsibilities right away. We realized that this was something that was very fragile, but also very unique. And then we looked around a little further, and this was the pelvis sticking up out of the ice, and the legs were going straight down into the ice. That's all we saw for human remains. And if somebody didn't tell us that it was a human pelvis, or if you didn't know I told you it was a human pelvis, people wouldn't know what it was. We've taken apart all sorts of animals, and this definitely didn't look like anything we'd hunted before. So now we had some serious questions, and we weren't sure what to do. We were a 3-day hike from the truck, so we had a lot of questions on our mind. We still wanted to go hunting, of course, but we now had this heavy weight on our shoulders trying to determine what we're going to do with this discovery. And if it was old, or if it was a missing person, or whatever, the clues were leading us to believe that it was going to be quite old. I'm going to check my notes because, like I said, I got 25 years of stuff stuffed in my head here. And so a little further down the ice, so we took a few pictures. We didn't disturb anything. We kept a few of the artifacts, the 2 pieces of stick, the atlatl, the little knife and sheath, and that piece of fringe. And we put them in little Ziploc bags that we had. We kind of kept them clean and what we considered uncontaminated, but from a scientist perspective, we probably contaminated them. And anyways, we went hunting. And we still had 3 days of food, and we had 3 days to get back to the truck. And we noticed this moose. And I said, hey guys, a friend of mine hunted here 10 years ago, and he found the same moose in the ice patch. He told me to keep an eye out for it. This was the same moose in 1989, so 10 years prior. And so the moose is just kind of slowly, the skull cap has come off, the bones are still in the ice, but it's slowly receding, and as it's sliding further and further down the ice patch every year. So we get back to our camp, and the next morning we pack up, and we've got our meat, and we've got our horns and capes, and we figured we got about 100 pounds here each, and we have about 40-kilometer hike back to the truck. But we're not sure, again, what we're going to do with Discovery. We're still kind of giddy about it all. Film cameras, so we're not sure if the pictures are going to turn out or not. You know, you can't just scroll through your phone and see if your pictures turned out and take another one. And because you're backpack hunting, everything, like you're going to take 2 rolls of film. You're not taking 10 rolls of film. You're taking a little tiny point-and-shoot camera. So everything is trying to keep the weight on your back down. On our way out in that little mine site, we were able to find a little bit of wood and cook up some sheep meat because we were pretty much tired of freeze-dried food and oatmeal and porridge. So here's a bit of that seismic road that's remaining. We get back to the truck. We're trying to decide on, again, we got about a 3.5 hour drive into Whitehorse. So we're in BC, back up through Haines Junction into Yukon, and then to Whitehorse. And we're deciding now, if we take it all the way back into British Columbia, it'll be Fort Nelson before the first major community in the BC. And it's a long way outside of the jurisdiction of where we were hunting. So on our way back, Warren finds this brochure in the back of the truck that we picked up on the way up, the Yukon Beringia Interpretive Center. So kind of like the Rossland Museum, this is the Beringia Museum, and again, they would have mammoths and short-faced bears and everything that was on the landscape during the Bering Land Bridge, during 10,000 years ago. So we thought that might be a good place. They might know who we can talk to. So we knocked on the door that evening when we got back into town, and it was just closing up for the night. It was open till 8 o'clock in the summertime. And there was a summer student kind of cleaning up and everything. We knocked on the door, told them who we were, that we had this discovery. Do they work with any archaeologists? And they said, as a matter of fact, we do. And he's a site assessment archaeologist, works for the Yukon government by the name of Greg Hare. He went through his Rolodex, and he found his number, and we phoned him. We borrowed their phone, and we phoned him right then and there, and said, hey, Greg, explained who we were, what we were doing. We found all these artifacts. And by the way, there's a body with these artifacts. So that got his attention right away. He said, well, there's no use coming down right now. I'll meet you first thing in the morning. He was doing ice patch studies for the previous 10 years. As these ice patches are receding, they're spitting out all sorts of artifacts, but they'd never spit out a body before. So he was quite interested in, and again, he knew the protocol in terms of who to contact. Because it wasn't determined if it was ancient or not, contact the RCMP for a missing person, the First Nations, again, for their involvement right off the get-go, another site assessment archaeologist by the name of Dr. Ruth Goddard, and they were able to fly in the next morning. So they met us at the Beringia Center the next morning, and here's that stick that we thought, and they thought it was an atlatl throwing board as well, part of the walking stick. Here's that tool, the knife and the sheath, the piece of fringe, and when I first showed my mom these pictures, my mom said, oh, Billy, he's not that old. He's carrying a Swiss Army knife. My mom doesn't hunt. My dad doesn't hunt. My dad says, I've never owned a gun or a horse. I don't know what the hell happened to this kid. So anyways, they were quite excited to see these. And this turned out to be a gopher snaring tool. And again, still in use today for when First Nations are snaring gophers. This turned out to be part of a 13-foot salmon gaffing tool. So these are all starting to lead to the clues of who he was and where he came from, right in the early days, even before it was determined who he was. They could tell right away that these were First Nation tools and belongings. You'll see some curated pictures of all these things coming up that were done by the museum, so there's a lot clearer pictures. So all this happened, and that day, because he had a helicopter already booked to do his usual ice patch studies, he was able to redirect the helicopter to fly down into British Columbia, because his ice patch studies were occurring in Yukon, and be able to pick up the right people and fly into the site. So here's where we were standing and having lunch. Here's where we started picking up sticks, right where about the helicopter is. Here's where Warren was standing when he looked up. This is the robe. This is Greg here looking over the pelvis right here. There's the most recent snow of the year. These are some of the other, like the First Nations cultural people and the other scientists. So anyways, that gives you an idea of the location where we were when we started picking up sticks. As the helicopter fluttered over the site, his hat fluttered away. And we never saw the hat. The hat wasn't melted out when we were there. So this is 4 days later after we were at the site. So it was 4 days after that they finally got there, and the hat had melted out. Here's those 3 nunatucks I talked about. Here's where this tent is where Warren was standing when you looked up. There's that wall of ice where we started picking up sticks here. Our camp was on the back side of this range over here. I shot my ram up in this range here. The rams we were looking for on that day were in this basin when we first saw them a few days before. So this picture just shows the natural intensity of the area and the natural intensity and the elements that Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi lived in. So all this is happening very fast. When they flew out that evening, they offered to bring one of us with them on their trip, but they would have to make multiple trips with the helicopter already. And we said, we got a 3,000 kilometer drive ahead of us to get home. We've been gone for a couple weeks now, so we'll talk to you tonight. You phone us when you come out, and we're dying to know if this is ancient or if it's significant or not. So they did that and said, yes, we're putting together a team, and that team included, they had to negotiate with the First Nations first of all because it was a co-managed provincial park. And again, just the protocols, this has never happened before. They needed to have just a lot of communication going on. And what are we going to do if we exhume it, or once we start finding all these artifacts, who do they belong to? It hasn't been identified yet. So anyways, there was a lot of discussion and negotiation, but cooperation at the beginning. So when they came back with a team, they were able to, some of the authors of the book, like Al Mackey is here, he's with the British Columbia Archaeological Branch. Here's a park warden, actually Gordon McRae was the actual park warden, superintendent for the Tashishini-Alsac Provincial Park. They also recruited Dr. Owen Beattie out of the University of Alberta. He wrote the Franklin Expedition, probably one of the few scientists in the world that had experience dealing with frozen remains. So they brought him up. Here they are exhuming. This is the torso right here. And they had to high frequency radar scan the ice to try to find where the remains were. They knew where the pelvis was, of course, and the legs, but over the centuries the ice had shifted, and so the legs were separate from the arms, and everything was all kind of taken apart. Here's an interesting picture. It shows just the recovery of the torso, but just again the condition of the ice. That's Greg Hare there. That's Dr. Owen Beattie there. So once they removed the remains, it was determined to fly to the Royal BC Museum in Victoria because they were able to have a facility they could mimic the culture, the environment, the humidity of the glacier, the temperature of the glacier. So they were able to have a specified freezer in a certain room that they could put the remains in until they decided how they were going to be dealt with. So all the artifacts went down as well, And again, you could see that there was a lot more artifacts than what we had found by the time they got back there, and more of the remains had melted out and more of the artifacts had started to expose. They had found over 36 different artifacts at that location alone, and they didn't all belong to Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi. So as this is all happening, the word got out that an Iceman had been found, and of course the media, they like to speculate, they like to blow things out of proportion. He's 10,000 years old and you know, older than Ötzi, and there's only ever been one other ancient ice mummy found in the world, and that was Ötzi, the Italian-Austrian Iceman, and he turned out to be 5,000 years old, and I guess there's a movie coming out on him, just all the findings that they had. And there was one scientist that worked on both Ötzi and Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi, and he wrote a book called Ancient Ice Mummies, and that'll be sequel 3. So anyways, the media got a hold of it, and half the time that they're trying to develop this project, or the conditions under which this research is going to conduct itself, with the respect of the person, the respect of the First Nations culture, everything, governments and scientists around the world and everything else, the media got a hold of it, and we were front page news of the National Post. And this is right at the time when digital cameras just started to come out. Your professional photographers had them. The photographer showed up. He was a reporter with the Calgary Herald, which was part of the National Post chain of newspapers at the time. He took a picture of my pictures, sitting at my kitchen table, interviewing me, unplugged my landline from the wall, plugged in his laptop, and was able to download pictures from his phone and then send them across with over the telephone to the headquarters. So the next day when I went into town, I didn't know all this was happening. I didn't understand the technology, and I still don't. And I walk in and I see the newsstands, and this is a picture on the front page. So, when was the last time someone was on the front page of the National Post with a gun? They're in prison. And that's not the Iceman.
No, close.
So again, all these pictures, like he took pictures of my pictures and me at the kitchen table, and in the meantime, Warren and Mike were getting all the local media, and they were. A media scrum is a true thing. It really happens. Your phone rings off the hook. People are knocking on your door. They're interviewing. They're sticking microphones in your face and cameras in your face, and yeah, it was pretty intense for about 2 weeks there, because they want to learn something. Not just a speculation, and they're trying to get someone to say something so they can hold them accountable. So a lot of the pictures we got, were taken early on, and we were able to, because we were part of the project team, we were able to get involved and share a lot of the pictures. Nelson teachers, I was from Elkford.
2 to 1, Bill.
2 to 1, yeah, they had me outnumbered there. So yeah, just again, a lot of the articles that came out right off they interviewed Mike, and Mike gave a great interview, and again, just like, what do you feel? Like, it was still pretty early, in it all, because nothing had been proven yet. It took another year before they had a lecture series where they were able to kind of start to announce some of the findings. And those have changed over the years from what they first determined. So again, interviewing the chief at the time, Chief Bob Charlie. But one thing that was what was certain in all our interviews and all our presentations over the years, that we've always used, we never shied away from why we were on the land. We were hunting when this happened. And so I think I've found an opportunity to talk to general audiences, some that might hunt, some that might not, some that are unsure about hunting, but maybe shed hunting in a positive light. So that's kind of been part of our involvement in this. I probably give most of my presentations to conservation organizations for fundraisers and that kind of thing, and of course community service groups, etc. So it definitely does give us an opportunity to talk about hunting in a day and age when there's questions about it, when it might not always be positive in the press. Well, before I jump into number 2, I'll tell you about some of the things that were going on at the time. So in 2000, the first lecture series occurred at the University of Victoria, and there was 1,000 people here. And I had a slide carousel. And it was a, oh, just a sec, that slide's upside down, right side up. And we were the first, again, we introduced, because we were invited down and been part of the whole project team the whole time. One of the, they put quite a few conditions on this project, on how the remains were going to be handled, just for the respect for the person. And one of the conditions was that no pictures of the remains will ever be published. Another was that during the science, no parts of the body will be destroyed, no parts of the remains will be destroyed for science. Another one was that in 1 year's time, the First Nations get the remains back to do a traditional cremation and return them to the glacier and have a potlatch. So all those things were in the conditions in the contract, and so this was all happening at the same time as the scientists were taking their different research across the globe. So some of the studies included radiocarbon dating of his belongings, because they couldn't radiocarbon date his body. They would have destroyed too large a piece in 1999. The technology wasn't there yet. DNA profiling, so they wanted to determine his DNA to determine if he was First Nations or not. And his DNA came out as mitochondrial haplogroup A, which indicates he's a descendant of the first peoples of the Americas. So definitely he was First Nations. There was no question about that. So paleontology, microbiology, cryobiology, which is the effects of temperatures on organs, forensic botany, anthropology, archaeology, ethnography, taphonomy. Taphonomy is how things dissipate into the environment. Entomology, the insects. Isotopic analysis of the contents of his alimentary canal. They were able to put together a timeline of the last week of his life based on where he was on the landscape, indicated by the minerals, the lichen, the mosses, the different things that he had in his alimentary canal. Curation of the fur robe, the hat, and the artifacts. Environmental scanning, electron microscopy, which is, it measures to 10,000th of a millimeter. The robe pollen study, they washed the robe, and any pollen that came off the robe indicated what plants were in bloom that time of year. So they were able to determine that he was on that glacier in mid-August, and he was probably caught in a midsummer storm or a late summer storm, just by the plants that the pollen that they were able to get out of the robe. They had a community DNA study where they tested various communities and individuals around Alaska, Yukon, and British Columbia for living descendants. They found 17 living descendants. We shook hands with them. That was another, tingle up our spine moment. I'll get more into that in another sequel. They were able to, at the time in 1999, they didn't want to take that knife apart to see if it had a metal tip on it, or if it was, they weren't sure it was too corroded. And if they took it apart, they would have destroyed the artifact. So they waited until the technology of X-radiograph, which is a laser that can measure any element in the world. And because it was hemlock handle, moose hide thong, lace, it was a piece of metal, but it was ferrous metal. And wasn't meteoric, so it probably from a shipwreck or a board that washed ashore and there was nails or something in it, that they recovered those nails and used them as a microblade. So there was a beaver hide sheath that it was in as well. So they were able to determine all that. So in 2001, when the research on the remains were done, the Champagne-Anajiac First Nation had a burial ceremony and returned the remains to the ice. The same people that took him off the ice returned him to the ice. So that's the urn. It still has some of the ashes in it. The remainder of the ashes were put out over the glacier. This was earlier in the summer because the snow of the year is still there. So now we can get into some of the science of what they determined again in 2003. So here's what was recovered. There was no right arm, no lower right leg, no feet apart from a few foot bones. There was no head, but a mass of hair was found nearby. So that's what they recovered. And in 2003, Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi was carbon dated, or was determined to be 550 years old. So sometime before, between 1415 and 1445, so predated Columbus. And that was the technology of the day that was able to determine the accuracy at that time. The first date that came out that they never did publish was 1,000 years old. And then it was updated when they had better technology to 450 years old. And now, 550 years old. And then it was upgraded again to between 150 and 297 years old. And so that's the latest dates, and those were the dates that were published. And the problem with the carbon dating of the human remains, even though that now they can do it with destroying very little, just molecules, is that anything, and his belonging as well, it's called the marine reservoir effect. If you catch a salmon in the ocean today, it'll carbon date 300 years old because the ocean is a carbon sink. By this time, they recognized that he was a coastal Indian and he had traveled inland. So all his belongings were coastal. And so therefore, and wooden. So how old was the tree that the artifact was made of to begin with? So that tended to skew things. And again, to try to be accurate was very difficult. So they had determined by this time that he was a man in his late teens, early 20s, probably about 20 years old, approximately 5 foot 7 feet tall. He wasn't expecting to die, and that was the most significant thing about the discovery, that he was going about his everyday business. It wasn't a ritualized burial. He was on the land with the tools he needed to survive when he perished. He wasn't expecting to die. They figured he was face down on the ice with his head on his right hand because some of the hair was in his right hand bones, yet there was no head. He was astonishingly well preserved. It was like frozen and buried immediately. 0 pre-death trauma and 0 post-mortem decay. It was determined it wasn't a violent death and he didn't fall in a crevasse. Because when they when they scanned the glacier, it wasn't, the topography under the ice was flat. So it didn't allow that ice to crack. There wasn't enough topography under the ice to cause that ice to crack. So he didn't fall in a crevasse. So their theory is that he probably got caught in a midsummer storm and caught hypothermia, got tired, got sleepy, put his head down to rest and never woke up in the middle of a blizzard and was buried. And 150 years to 300 years ago was a mini ice age. So again, glaciers and snow was accumulating. So all the post-mortem damage was from the shifting ice over the century, and he was carrying hunting tools. I'll get into the theories of why he was there in a minute, but that his clothing indicated a man of status because he had quality clothes. Small knife, snaring tool, 13-foot salmon gaffing tool. He was determined to be a Tlingit Indian, and they were known to carry these long salmon gaffing tools. And again, to probe snow when they're walking across ice, for balance, of course for fishing. They could lean to it and create a shelter. They used it for all sorts of things, for defense. So they were known to carry these large salmon gaffing tools. He was carrying bits of dried sockeye salmon. I'll have a slide on that in a minute. He had a 99% pure copper bead around his neck. It turned out to be native copper. He was carrying a medicine pouch or a spirit bundle around his neck that they never did open up. That went with him in the freezer, and it went with him when he was cremated. He had neatly cut, straight black hair, no braids, about 18 inches long. Talked about the mitochondrial DNA. Further, the DNA analysis proved the presence of Mycobacterium tuberculosis in the heart and lungs. Yet he carried the tuberculosis virus, but he wasn't infected by it. And again, it's pre-contact for their particular region, so they're not sure how he has that tuberculosis virus. His intestines contained a large number of fish tapeworms, probably the result of eating raw or undercooked fish. And again, the evidence from the pollen indicates that the death happened in late July or early August. Here's just a graph, again, more science in terms of, this is taphonomy, how things dissipate in the environment. So they created, the torso and robe, the ice flow, the ice edge. Which way, so where would the parts that were not found in the original discovery, where would be the most likely direction they would be in if they were still around? So it just showed where the hair masses and what was found where, kind of on a cross section of that glacier. There's a close-up of the man tool, of the knife. So the moose hide lace, it laced on a little piece of collagen which they used to wedge in the microblade. That was, again, it was so corroded that they couldn't determine it was to metal until they X-radiographed it. A beaver skin sheath. And a friend pointed out to me, he says, "Bill, you know who the last person was to pull that knife out of the sheath before you? You know that, eh?" So, here's the woven spruce root hat. It was woven so tightly it could still hold water today. It was stained with red ochre, which of course had washed out over the centuries in the ice. But in terms of the weaving, it was woven spruce root, determined to be found, of course, in sandy soil, so it's nice, long, straight roots. They did a community weaving project to try to recreate that hat, and they had lost the skills. They didn't have the skill set, had been lost over the years to be able to reproduce that hat. Same with the gopher skin ropes, in terms of the trapping and the preparing of the hides and the sewing of the hides together, and the stitches were so small on those hides that it just created, it required great skill, probably using, a fish bone or something for a needle. So here's the copper skin, or the copper bead, 99% pure copper. It was a trade route, or a trade goods of the time, and he wore it around his neck on a amulet or a lace. So here's down at the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, and they're curating the robe. That's Richard Hebna and Al Mackey, both authors of the book. And it was a jigsaw puzzle to put it together. Shows some of the size of the hides that they used. A moose hide collar, so it wore like a robe, and he would tie it around his neck to hold it on. Reinforced shoulders. All the seams were greased and stained with red ochre. There's a repair patch there. When they did a DNA study on the repair patch, it was determined to be mountain goat sinew twisted together with blue whale sinew. So it sent the DNA charts right off the meter. So imagine you need some new hunting clothes. Well, we got to catch a whale, cold caught 95 Arctic ground squirrels, sew them all together. Yeah, so it was again a product of their culture and their families, and who had the skills developed to be able to do that. Little tiny, just very, very, very fine stitching. There's the red ochre, and it was greased, so they were waterproof. At first, they thought it was a chum salmon, but at further research, it indicated to be he was carrying some pieces of dry sockeye salmon. These are the scales. They determined the fish to be caught in a freshwater stream because of the abrasions on the scales that were still present 300 years later. So we call it CSI Tachishini. So here we are on the banks of the Tachishini in 2003. We applied again for limited entry, thinking it was going to take us a few years to draw. We drew the first time. So Mike and I, Warren wasn't able to make it. Mike and I have been hunting sheep since our first trip in 1992, shortly after he got married. We went on a hunting moon together. And we're still hunting together. So on our way through, we had, again, a 3,000 kilometer drive and lots to talk about, and we wanted to stop and see Greg Hare on our way through Whitehorse. Just because once all this research went off the charts, off the various parts of the world, we weren't hearing anything. After that first lecture series in 2000 at the University of Victoria, the Royal BC Museum, we hadn't heard anything for years. So we thought, well, it just takes that long to do all this research. So we stopped to see Greg Hare, we spent the night with him, and we kind of got an update on everything that's going on, and he said, well, the whole project's kind of fizzled. And we kind of asked him why, and he got into a little bit of some cultural issues that they were having, because it was only a partial discovery, yet they had a cremation, and they put him back on the glacier, yet some of them still here. So there were some spiritual issues that they were dealing with, so they didn't want anything to do with the project at the time. And he says, because I said, well, what about the scientists? Who's putting the story together? There's got to be, a compilation of all the research that's going on, or up until this point anyways. And he said his exact words were, no head, no story. So we're going, well, that's too bad. I mean, we thought there was a lot of momentum behind this. So anyways, off we went, and we're going hunting. So we know where we want to go. We want to go to the site again, say our last respects, and we were in the critical refugia, which is the best of the best sheep habitat. We were just starting to get into some real wild country, and we wanted to kind of highball it straight back there as fast as we could. So again, here we are on the banks of the Tashinshini River, and these rivers, you don't know how high they're going to be, because it's not the rain that brings the water up, it's the warm weather that melts those glaciers that bring this water up. So a little freshet in the morning, you can jump across it, but in the afternoon, you take your life in your hands to try to get across it. That's how rapidly these glaciers are crossing. And because there's so much silt that's melting in these rivers, you can't see how deep it is. So thus we have a walking stick to test the depth ahead of us. Digital camera, 2003, so again, it's much brighter. We can take a lot of pictures without increasing the weight on our packs. We kind of knew where we were going, but again, we're glassing our way through, trying to stay a little bit higher this time, get a better lay of the land, trying to get out of the wind to boil up some soup for lunch. We wanted to kind of explore a little different route on our way in. Like I said, because it's 360-degree sheep habitat everywhere you look. And again, those little freshets are they're nice and tame in the morning, and you can't fill your water bottle in them because you have a water bottle half full of sand. So that's the O'Connor River. So three major river systems come out of the Samuel Glacier: the Tashinshini, the Parton, and the O'Connor. And the O'Connor flows into the Tashinshini way down in the distance here. This is the main Tashinshini Valley. That then joins up with the the Alsac River before it gets to Glacier Bay. So again, we're in an area that is very intense in terms of weather. We're close enough to the ocean. We're close enough to glacier systems that the weather is there. The tip that was given to us kind of before climate change became a household term was that those middle 2 weeks of August are going to be the best chance to have good weather. And we knew that because that's when Greg Hare had been planning for the previous 15 years when he was doing his ice patch studies, those middle 2 weeks of August. So that's when we planned our hunts, to have the best chance for the best weather. And you can see these freshets starting to gain momentum during the middle of the day. Again, I think that was like about 11:30 at night. So when we're heading up to the site, we're about 3 days in, and we came across this rock wall. So we thought, okay, it might be a hunting blind or First Nations hunting blind or something. It turned out to be probably when there was a lot of mineral surveys and stuff going on in there, or a sheep hunter built it to get out of the wind. But it was one of those days, probably like the day Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi was there, but he wasn't wearing Peter Storm rain gear. He was wearing a gopher skin robe. It was almost snow. It was about 0 degrees. It was hypothermia kind of weather. You wanted to keep refueled. You wanted to make sure you ate, stay hydrated, and again, stay dry, because there's no way to start a fire in any of that country there. So we knew where we were going, even though it was foggy as can be, and we found the cairn where they brought gifts for Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi and left him gifts when they put his ashes back out on the glacier. So we again said our last respects. This is the cairn right here. And again, we can't see. We're really not hunting that day. We didn't think because it was so foggy. This is looking down on the ice surface. That wall of ice is kind of snowed in. The Nunaatucks are getting a lot bigger. We're again trying to get down into this basin here to hunt, but it was pretty foggy and rainy all day. And again, those Nunaatucks are now big, large chunks of rock, and that's what a Nunaatuck is. It's a rock island in a sea of ice. So we're walking along, and again, trying to stay on the ice, off the ice, on the ice, off the ice. But it's completely changed from 4 years prior. And First Nations and scientists have been there every year because they do a follow-up to see how much ice has melted and if they are, finding any other artifacts and such. So we start walking along, and I'm walking along this berm, and we said the same thing when we were sitting up top here. Let's just go around the edge of the ice, and Mike said, hey, maybe we'll find some more artifacts. And we're walking along, and I step up over the ice, and I said, hey, Mike, there's the head. He swore at me. Honestly, he swore at me. And I wasn't joking. So 4 years later, we're 55 kilometers in from the truck on foot. It had been researched to death for the last 4 years. And again, because we feel that we were chosen to find them, we were chosen to finish the job too, and say, okay, let's get this project back on track. Let's get these, these cultural issues that have occurred, and for us to, again, be there for it to happen a second time is kind of a way of explaining to us that we were meant to find it. We were chosen to find it. And like I said, one of the conditions of the whole project was that no pictures of the remains would ever be published. And to this day, you can Google Earth it. You can Google it. Nothing's been published. There's not a picture of the remains in the book, so it hasn't been. So I asked Skylar not to video it tonight. So it's shared when we do our presentations, and that's it. Even the scientists couldn't publish anything in the journal there. So we took a few pictures. This is that temporal bone right here on the side of your head. Part of the moose hide collar for the robe. So again, more artifacts were found as well. Scapula, part of the right arm that was missing. And that was down in about a 2-foot deep pool of water. So we took a few pictures. We kind of knew the protocol. We knew what to do. We knew who to phone later. And even at this time, we weren't carrying satellite phones, or there was no GPS systems. There was no, spot systems or anything like that. So we just had to wait till we got back to civilization to tell somebody, till we could put a dime in a phone and phone someone. So, of course, we went hunting because we just got to the best of the best spot. We finally got there, distracted a couple of years, and the fog finally lifted, and we could see there were 50 sheep all around us. The basin was full of sheep, and I was friends with the biologists that did the sheep research in this area. For years they studied the Dall sheep in BC because there's only 2 small populations of Dall sheep in BC. He said that if you see a big band of ewes and lambs, they're in the best habitat, but those rams won't be far because they need good groceries too. They need some good habitat as well. So again, in the middle of these 43 ewes and lambs, there were 7 Dall rams. So we got pinned down because we got stuck when the fog lifted out in the middle of this basin. And again, my theory was that Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi was there because he was a sheep hunter. He was the first sheep hunter. That's my theory. I mean, there's other theories that he was an ancient traveler. He was an ancient messenger. So he would bring a message from his village to another village. The romantics theory is that he had met someone in the interior, and then he was returning back to get gifts, and on his return trip he perished. But our theory was that he was an ancient sheep hunter. So anyways, we kind of got hunkered down all day. We didn't want to spook these sheep out because we were watching these rams. And about, again, late in the day, about 6 o'clock at night, we could see this storm coming up the basin on us. So once we got engulfed in the storm, we made our play, and I was able to sneak up on this ram. I just kept going higher and higher in the fog, and I couldn't see any sheep, but I was climbing up this basin, and I'd go 100 yards, and I'd stop, and I'd glass, and then I couldn't see anything, so I went up a little higher, and I stopped, and I glassed. I did this for about an hour, and then I could see this, the fog lifted for a little bit, and there was like an apparition, and there was one sheep there, and it was a full crow ram. And then the fog blew in again, so I just stopped, and I waited, and it was about 100 yards away. The fog lifted, I shot the ram, and as the fog continued to lift, there was 49 sheep all around. I ran right up a horseshoe of sheep, and the only ram I could see was the only legal ram that was there. And so my feeling is that the spirit of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi was very strong that day in that basin, and we were rewarded for it. I turned my rain gear inside out in case we got busted, so I looked like a sheep. I just pretend I was a white sheep. That's a technique. And hope your rain gear is white on the inside because it's green on the outside. So you can see in the background the lakes and the the glacier that we're spending most of our time in. Never did get past that until today. So it's about 11 o'clock at night here, but we got the ram taken apart. Our camp is in the next valley over. So we got an all-night shin tangle side hill gouge through creeks and everything in the dark with those little tiny headlamps that didn't work very good back then. They were half fuzzy. Luckily it doesn't get really dark there, even though it's raining and it was a miserable night. You can tell we're wet. So that's when you really count on your partner. We get into zone. And you can't take a bad step, you can't take a bad turn, or you land on your face. So yeah, you kind of have to count on your partner. And it definitely, that challenge, to deliberately do hard things. What do they call that? Type A fun? So it's always nice the next day to get into camp. We were able to dig up a bit of willow and cook some sheep's kebabs. It's always nice to have a sheep in camp. So again, the chore day, take the ram apart, keep the head out, and relax and try to, because we rode back into camp about 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're too wired to sleep. You can't sleep, so you usually cook something and just get the day going. So now we got a ram, we're going to start hiking our way out, but we still have a few days to hunt, so we're going to hunt our way out. Looking down into, we call this the drop of doom, because we know we got to come back up it, and hopefully load it. This is probably my favorite all-time hunting picture, just in terms of, because of the discovery, and because of probably the wildest country that we've ever been able to hunt, and probably will ever be able to hunt. And just again, it captured that moment. What's left of our walking stick that we had. It was long when we crossed the river, but it was getting worn off and broken and everything else. And I think I always like to quote Theodore Roosevelt, who called this the doctrine of the strenuous life: to do hard things on purpose and to challenge yourself. He called it the arduous pursuit. So we like to use the theory of the twin virtues of hunting, which are effort and ethics, and I think the effort comes first, so therefore the respect comes after. When we were, one of the lecture series, we met some Tlingit elders, and they said probably the most significant thing that was said to us during the whole 25 years of this event was that you found Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi because you're hunters of right heart and spirit. And we mulled over that, and what does that mean to us? And I think it's not what you do, but it's how you do it is most important. And I think they recognize that, and the Tlingit elder recognized that, and that was probably our greatest compliment in the whole project. So I like to always you know, I belong to what's called Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We've got a few of our West Kootenay representatives here tonight, and I always give an unabashed shout out to the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I sit on the North American Board of Directors, and I've given this presentation numerous times in various of our rendezvous and such, and so I always give a shout out to the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. So we're hunting. So we come out of the Drop of Doom and we look over the edge, and up on the ridge there's 5 rams here and there's 2 full crow rams right there. So we go to make a play on them, and again, you know, like it's called fair chase hunting for a reason, and it's not, you don't always get the ram. So we waited all day in the wind and the cold, trying to wait for these rams to get up and move, and 3 little ones did. But the 2 big ones disappeared off the backside, and we never did see them again. We looked for a few more days. We hunted a few more days before we started. We wanted to, you know, we were running out of provisions out of the sheep meat, and we were heading out. We had very good weather other than the day we were on the site. We had very good weather after that. Down in the Parton River. And that's the Samuel Glacier in the background. We're trying to time the river crossing because, again, it was quite warm, and we wanted to cross it as late in the evening as possible because it would pulsed already, and so it was starting to drop. So we knew we could get across the Parton River was trickier because it was swifter, it was narrower and swifter, whereas the Tashishini was kind of big and winding, so it was quite easier to cross. So once we reported it, we went into Whitehorse, and I phoned the chief at the time, and her name was Diane Strand. And we had talked over the years and were involved in a lot of things, and particularly at the beginning, the very first discovery. And when I told her that, you know, we just came out of the site again, we were hunting there, and by the way, the head's on the ice surface. The head's now exposed. She literally dropped the phone. And it was because of she knew that this was kind of going to rejuvenate everything and kind of solve a lot of the problems that occurred. And I don't even want to get into that. It doesn't get into that into the book as well. But she was kind of relieved. But they didn't want to resurrect everything and have another big, huge media, you know, scrum and everything else. So I think it was about 6 weeks later. It made, I think, page 26 of the Vancouver Sun. That was their announcement. But it was able to rejuvenate and get all these scientists back. And the First Nations back on side as well. So, sequel 3. So I've been back to the site 4 times, 2 for hunting trips and 2 for subsequent expeditions. And in 2005, like I mentioned, Dr. Jim Dixon from the University of Glasgow, he was studying the stomach contents. He studied the stomach contents of Witsi, and he was studying the stomach contents of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi. And so he asked me if I would like to guide his expedition. Because he was looking for the clues that he found in Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi's stomach to help him put together that timeline of the last week of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi's life. So, like I said, he was studying the contents of the alimentary canal, also known as chyme. He's a forensic botanist. We were funded by the Carnegie Trust of Scottish Universities and the Royal London Geographical Society. And while we were in Whitehorse, because that's where we started the expedition, we were able to go to the Whitehorse Archaeological Branch Office where they were curating all the artifacts. They had been brought back up there to be curated by the local First Nations, their cultural team, and Sheila Greer, the other author of this book. And so here's part of the walking sticks, or the salmon gaffing tool. First 2 sticks that we actually picked up when Mike said, hey, I think these fit together. The woven spruce root hat, and that's the first time I'd seen the hat myself personally. So it was 5 years after it was found. You see a little bit of the red ochre. Red ochre is iron ore. Tightly woven. That's Dr. Sheila Greer. She's a archaeologist, University of Alberta, but also Champagne and Aishihik First Nations as well. So she does a lot of her work in Champagne, Yukon. That's our photographer on the trip, Al. Holding part of the salmon gaffing tool. The knife was out at that time. By 2005, it was out being X-radiographed, so they had the technology to be able to determine the elements without destroying it, so that's why it wasn't there. Here's Dr. Dixon and Petra Moody. She was with Natural Resources Canada. She was a forensic botanist as well. I only had camouflage, so that's all I So we got to cheat, we got to fly in, and did we ever get some aerial photography to see where we were trudging all those years? And you can see the Parton River here. We would come up this valley, over this shoulder, up into where the mine site was, around this corner to the Drop of Doom, and down into the Samuel Glacier that was back there. So in terms of, that's the mountain range we were hunting. And that's the head of the Parton River, and then the O'Connor River flows out that side. So the Tashishini comes around here, the Parton flows into the Tat, and then the O'Connor flows into the Tat over here. And the Tashishini makes a big loop around this glacier system. We were with the park warden. He was a Champagne and Aishihik First Nation park warden by the name of Greg Eklund. And he helped pack all the gear as Jim botanized our way across the landscape. You can see that there's almost no ice left in 2005. There's no wall of ice. Where we found the head was probably right about here, you know, in 2003. Here's Jim collecting, again, lichen and whatever he can find that's popping up. Again, that's the discovery site. There's no ice left at all. We also found on a little piece of ice, canine. It was determined to be a wolf. The Tlinkits were known to have pack dogs, so there was a chance that it could have been a big domestic dog, or a big dog that they used for packing. But it turned out to be a wolf. So a wolf, a moose, and a human all in the same ice patch. So another theory was, or not a theory, why was he there? There was Indian fishing villages down on the Tashishini River where the O'Connor River goes into the Tashishini. So that's why there was this route that was used over the centuries, and why that a lot of the artifacts were there that didn't belong to Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi, because it was a known route. There's our moose. It's just sliding further down the ice, and the ice is getting less. I mean, you can see the depth of where the ice used to be. Dr. Dixon, and again, he had just come out of the Alps, spending 6 weeks up there doing his research on Utsi. And like I said, Jim, you should get a little stiffer boot. These boots are perfectly fine, he says. I just spent 6 weeks in the Alps. So, okay, fine. Didn't take my advice. You didn't need it. So there's Empty Valley again. A lot more ice and snow has melted. We went for a hike down there, and I knelt down to tie up my boot, and I found this birch bark scroll. So there's no birch within probably 50 miles of here, so it was probably someone's fire starter kit. They don't know if it belonged to Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi or not, but it was again on that same route, and there's a picture of it in the book. There's our crew. What we did was we flew into the site. We spent 4 days as Jim botanized around the site, even taking water samples because the minerals in the water he was finding in the stomach contents. And then we would hike out as he was looking for certain mosses. Now there were 7 different types of moss found in Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi's elementary canal, and there's no culture on Earth. People don't eat moss. We don't eat lichen. And wonder why he was ingesting them. It was probably incidental. It was on the fish, or it was on his hands when he was, whatever he was doing when he was eating. And they're very elevation specific. So he could find a lichen that was at this elevation, and he knew that Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi grew up on the coast. His basic isotopes of his bone marrow and his blood cells indicated he grew up eating marine protein, a marine protein diet. Yet the most recent kind of 6-month growth of his hair indicated he was eating a terrestrial diet. So the theory is he grew up on the coast, he traveled inland, he returned to the coast to resupply. He had a stomach full of seafood. He had whale blubber, he had crustacean, he had sea asparagus. He had all indication that he had just come from the coast. He had some dried sockeye salmon on him, yet he was 50 miles inland from the nearest marine environment when he perished. So they figured that he was coming from the coast inland, not vice versa. So Jim wanted to find these lichens, and he was having trouble finding one that he found in the stomach contents that he couldn't find on the landscape anywhere. And it's in his other book, and I've got a picture of that coming up, but I wish he called everything by the Latin name, yeah. So I didn't know what the heck he was talking about half the time, but this day we hiked about 20 kilometers, and it was about 6 o'clock at night, and he's getting weary, he's getting grumpier, and he says, Bill, we gotta find a place to camp because I still have to botanize, and I still can't find Sphagnus magnus aurelius. Hang on, Jim. So anyways, we were on this thick trail kind of going along the Parton River, and I said, just dump your packs, I'll go for a look. I think there's some fresh water coming out of here, that stream. I said, I'll go see if there's a meadow that we can camp in. Just wait here. So I ran down the trail, kind of bobbed and weaved through all the willows, and I popped down in this beautiful meadow. Perfect, okay? Came back, broke a branch so I could find it again, ran up and got him. And they were only 10 minutes up the trail. Hey, Jim, I found your spot. Just come on, we got 10 minutes. So we got into this beautiful little meadow. We had some firewood. We were able to light a fire. We got our tent set up. And guess what he found? He did. He found the moss he was looking for. So he wasn't grumpy. He was pretty happy that night. So here we are crossing the Parton River, take our boots off. In the old days, we'd put our Crocs on, little wading sandal kind of stuff, and wade across the river and twist ankles and fall down and all that kind of stuff. We've evolved. We've got a better system now. We put our rain pants on. We put a compression strap around the top of our ankles, and so it's not like we're wearing hip waders. And we can cross with heavy packs, with our heavy boots on, and still have dry feet, and have stability crossing these swift streams. So he wrote a book called Ancient Ice Mummies, and he called the research a fantastically intellectual challenge. And he was able to, again, put not only an approximate itinerary, but also a relative timeline of the last few days of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi's life. This was the first in archaeology and forensic science that has ever happened. And he can tell you what Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi ate for his last meal before he perished on the glacier. So I've already mentioned about his KDT, Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi's isotopic analysis indicated a diet consisted of 90% dietary protein from marine sources. So another aspect of the discovery was a community DNA research to try to find living descendants of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi. So they tested over 300 people in Alaska, Yukon, and British Columbia, knowing that these First Nations did intermarriage. As long as you were within the same, you married within your clan. I'm trying to get the science right. So they found 17 living descendants of Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi that I shook hands with 14 of them. They had a lecture series and a Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi symposium in 2008, again at the University of Victoria. And it was another one of the hair-raising moments when you're meeting these people, that they are living descendants. And it was on the matriarchal side, because in First Nation oral history, it's the matriarch that keeps track of what clan you're in. And what it did was, the people that when they sampled your DNA, they asked you what clan you were from, and the 17 that were discovered to be living relatives were all of that clan. So it not only proved that the oral history is as accurate as science, but it proves that there is credibility to First Nation oral history. It was quite amazing. So I met this, her name was Sheila Clark, and her twin sister was Pearl Callahan. And Sheila at the time, she was the executive director of the Premier of Yukon, so she was very connected person. They were interviewed by the Victoria Times columnists, etc. We got a chance to meet with them. We went out for dinner with them. Anyways, she wrote a poem that I want to read because it just, in terms of the connection and the DNA and the history, she just kind of puts all that together so eloquently. So it's called Wolf Ancestor, because they were from the Wolf clan. Uncovered sleeping, a young man in ancient repose. White blanket disheveled, a lonely mountain bed, revealed. From the great beyond, you arouse my imagination, whispering to me in immortal language, your poetry in my DNA. In the expanse of my heart, we've met. You and I, in the eyes of my mother, a glimpse. In the music of my son's laughter, a note. In the wingspan of my nephew's eagle dance, a shadow. In the cadence of my grandfather's drum, a heartbeat. You, never lost, long ago person found, entombed in ice, the body abandoned, you left without leaving, your life gifted to me. Dancing in this ceremonial potlatch, I long for you. You are the ocean inside me, the rivers that call. Clink it, brother, your heart beats in mine. If that doesn't summarize, in terms of everything that was meant to happen, and finding an ambassador from the past to kind of rekindle and reconnect with the culture of today, and showing how such diverse cultures can work together to solve pretty much anything. Again, this is that poem just summarizes it for me. So like I said, the most recent age, in terms of determining when he was alive, he perished from 167 to 297 years ago. And again, there was zero European contact, even though they had been trading up and down the coast for years. Russians, British, like everybody, the otter fur trade and everything else. The spar trees for the navies of the world, all that stuff was happening on the coast of British Columbia, but it never got into the interior. And never got up into Glacier Bay and into where the Tlinkits lived. And the Tlinkits were, compared to the Southern Shoshone were nomadic people, and they had to follow their food source around seasonally. So they weren't able to leave any artifacts or leave any totem poles or longhouses or any of the kind of things that people that lived on the coast who had a surplus of food, so therefore they had a surplus of time. So they could have art, they could have warfare, slavery, trained dogs, artifact, or like incredibly made clothing, etc., because they had spare time, because they had spare food. And then again, it still very significant discovery in the fact that he predates any European contact in that region, and that it was lived during that last little ice age, which ended about 150 years ago. So Jim Dixon wrote this book called Ancient Ice Mummies. It came out in about 2000, and it came out before this book, but a lot of his findings were saved for this book. So it's only about 3/4 of a book on Otzi, and that's Otzi right there, and then about 1/4 of the book on Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi. And again, more comparing the scientific techniques that he used to compare the two, that he basically developed. How are we doing for time? We're good. So, I've been back to the site 4 times, and the 4th time was in 2014 with an adventure writer by the name of John Turk. And John Turk, because he writes about the deep ecology of wilderness, and he wants to experience landscapes that have a spiritual significance, he mentioned Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi in his book In the Wake of the Jomon. A Jomon is a Southeast Asian nomadic peoples, ancient nomadic peoples. And his theory was that the Kennewick Man, we've heard of the Kennewick Man, the skeleton they found in the banks of the Columbia River down around the Tri-Cities there. The Kennewick Man turned out to be 14,000 years old. And it's never been released that he was an American Indian, because the theory is, well, the science is he wasn't an American Indian, he was a Jomon, he was a Southeast Asian. So John's theory was that he was an ancient mariner, and that they followed the Pacific Rim up and eventually came around to North America prior to the Bering Land Bridge, so 14,000 years ago. So to prove his theory, he threw a kayak off the north end of Japan, John Turk, and he paddled to Alaska. And then he wrote a book called The Wake of the Jomon, and then he went back to Kamchatka 5 more times because he had met an ancient Koryakan shaman, and he wrote a book called The Raven's Gift. And then he wrote a book called Crocodiles and Ice, which part of a chapter is about our expedition here, because he wants to experience these living landscapes and then write about them. So off we went in 2014. And here's John Turk here. John Bergenski is a good friend of mine in the East Kootenay. He's probably one of the most, how would I say it, effective environmentalists in British Columbia in terms of establishing biodiversity guidelines and your forestry, forestry reform. Yeah, just involved in a lot of things. He has given his life to the wilderness. He signs all his letters for the wild, and so again, he's another wilderness wanderer. So the three of us got together, and we put our packs together for a 10-day trip in July into the Tashinshini, because we wanted to follow the route Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi took from the coast that Jim Dixon had identified. But we didn't start at the coast because we went on a bushwhack for the first 70 kilometers. So we started at what's called Clear Creek, right on the Haines Highway, south of Haines Junction, further south than where we went in for our hunting expeditions. And we started following the route that Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi took from the coast that Jim Dixon had found all the clues on. And it talks about it in the book, not our trip, but a project team trip that they took on the same route there. So that was the purpose of our trip, and then just to spend some time with John. John's most recent adventure was he polar circumnavigated Ellesmere Island at 65 years old. And he was National Geographic Explorer of the Year in 2011 for that expedition. He was pulling a 200-pound kayak full of provisions. When he wasn't paddling it, he was pulling it. And it was 1,500 kilometers. And he calls, that book's called Crocodiles and Ice. And he's next level stuff. He's comfortable in a mud puddle. He's mountain biked across Mongolia, across the Asian steppe, all the way to Hungary. Yeah, just amazing what he has done in his lifespan. So here we go. We're going to go up what's called these glaciers. They used to tow out into the ocean, and so this would have been probably an 80-kilometer long ice patch that flowed all the way to the ocean during Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi's time. So instead of hummock hopping and rock tripping and stumbling, they'd get on these glaciers, and again with a salmon gaffing tool, they could test for rotten ice and for crevasses and everything else, and they'd walk up these glaciers all the way from the coast. And that's why they were able to travel so fast. They figured Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi did 77 kilometers in 2 days on here. So off we went. We put micro spikes on. Again, John is comfortable. We put micro spikes on because we knew we were going to go on these glaciers, and recommended. And John's a full rack climber. Like he'll bivouac, kind of up on a corner of a cliff like that overnight, hang his tent off the edge of a cliff. And, he's next level stuff. So he recommended we stay on the old ice only, so we can see any crevasses, stay off of any new snow, because it could be hollow underneath. Put your micro spikes on, and off we went. So yeah, these would have been referred to as tidewater glaciers, because they start in the high country, and they tow all the way out to the ocean. So that's what we did. We started walking up this tidewater glacier. You could see during the Little Ice Age, the ice was that thick there. Rivulets, however you say that, were flowing, because again, as it got warmer and warmer, that just streams were flowing down the glacier. Again, right into that, we're heading up the back door into the empty valley. A crevasse. A moulin. That's like a whirlpool in the ice, and it just drills a hole. And I could throw a rock down there, and you kind of listen for it for a few seconds before it hits the rock. So it's still quite a thick ice patch, or again, tidewater glacier. And again, right up into the intensity of that landscape is. Can you imagine walking across it 300 years ago in the gear that Kwäday Dän Ts'inchi had? He didn't have his provisions on his back; he had to provide. He was wearing probably, they never did find any shoes or anything. And again, earlier in a lot of my early presentations, it was told that a lot of times the Klingons didn't wear shoes. They walked up these in bare feet. But there's nothing about that in the book there because they never did find any indication of footwear. Yet Greg Hare in these ice patch studies has found moccasins. Here we are having a snack in Empty Valley. That is one raw glacier. John was taking pictures, Bergenski was taking pictures, of course, because we're in these ones. Getting up near the site, and again, John wanted to experience the site. So again, we did, there's the cairn right there. There's the gifts that First Nations have brought over the years. They bring flowers and stuff. And John talks about the gifts that we left. He brought a piece of string because, he left a piece of string because string is very useful on your travels in the afterworld. And I brought him a piece of jerky from my daughter's first bull elk from the previous season. Because jerky's good to travel with. This picture of John. So we did about a 100-kilometer loop. We went up through Empty Valley, out and around into Fault Creek where we had the Drop of Doom, and then we circumnavigated and came right up the Parton River. This is the very headwaters of the Parton River, crossing to get back up into the glaciers again. Again, we're trying to, takes a lot of time to go through the country down in the river bottom, but then once we got up into the ice again, we traveled very fast. You could cover a lot of country in a very short time. Again, the most spectacular landscape, these long, there would have been numerous tidewater glaciers all coming out of the same glacier all the way to Glacier Bay in Alaska 300 years ago. And very easy walking up these glaciers. They're almost embedded in gravel, so there's a lot of traction. Probably the most spectacular place I've ever camped. And very comfortable. Like John, one of his theories is that he supplies for his adventure at the last outpost. Sure, it was a Safeway in Whitehorse, but again, he would pick foods like a big chunk of mozzarella cheese, a big chunk of, a lot of Landjaeger and a lot of protein and stuff like that. And yeah, it was amazing when he carried. He had a heavy pack. He never did any. John Bergenski and I prepared everything ahead of time. We had all dehydrated and freeze dried, and John would he'd pull out a chocolate bar, like that big, and just like I said, just comfortable. He says, "Oh, you guys got trekking poles. That would have been a good idea." we found on the survey staff along the trip. "Oh, you guys got full shank boots and high boots. That would have been a good idea." Didn't faze them. Didn't matter. It just didn't matter. So I like to, one of the first interviews I ever did was with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Their publication is called Bugle Magazine, about elk and elk hunting. And I was interviewed shortly after the discovery. I was called by the conservation editor. His name was Dave Stalling, and he wanted to interview me. And again, even the article today I read back, and again there was atlatls, and there were all sorts of things that aren't proven out. That once the research was all done, it was proven out. So it's an interesting article to read. But he summarized it by interviewing me, and he summarized it that the importance of wild areas and wilderness areas and these large intact ecosystems, and particularly my hunting message is imagining that long ago hunters plunge into oblivion. If I should fall and die in the wilds, God forbid, I would only hope that my remains are found long into the future, and they would be found by fellow hunters still pursuing wild animals in country still wild. So I kind of summarize my conservation talks that way. And I can add kind of a Rossland twist, because you don't want it to be found by hunters in country still wild, not mountain bikers. I added that one for Dario, who gets a thank you for arranging this event here tonight, and so I thought I would end with a thank you from Dario. John Turk again. He blew a boot so he had one blue boot and one orange boot, because he brought a spare boot. And again, that's polar circumnavigating Ellesmere Island. And it's amazing. It is absolutely, the things that he put himself through, what people can do, what we can endure is absolutely incredible. And again, Teachings from Long Ago Person Found is just a compilation of other discovery, and it really is, I mean, the latest thing in the news is this whole Land Act amendment and stuff, and just how we're trying to create kind of a collaboration with First Nations in terms of decisions on the land and our resources. And this is a prime example of something that has worked when we sit down and we put a lot of effort and a lot of respect into something. And again, it's been a real life-changing process to be involved in something like this. So it's available at Royal BC Museum. The proceeds go back into research, into archaeological and into British Columbia research and stuff like that. So again, thank you, Skylar. Thank you to the Rossland Museum. I've got some time for some questions. If anybody has any questions, it might jog my memory on something I might have missed. But if you have any questions, I'll be around after as well. I'm sure there's...
Thank you everybody for coming out here tonight. Let's do one more round of applause. That was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. We do have some more food left over, so if you're hungry, please take some. It'll help us out a little bit with cleanup. And otherwise, thank you all for coming out. Don't miss our next one, March 28th, and don't miss out on the silent auction either. Thank you guys so much.